Episode 209, How to Perform Personal Risk Management.
You're listening to the very best podcast in the world on health, wealth, and happiness. Please remember to leave a review and share with all your friends and family. And here is your host, Lars Hilser.
And it's Thursday. Welcome to the very best podcast in the world, your only source in the universe for personal supremacy through health, wealth, and happiness. Justifiably, you are asking yourself, what the hell struck me to do an episode about personal risk management in context to health, wealth, and happiness. And it's actually quite simple. The answer is, a while ago, I was reflecting on a friend of mine who had a terrible accident many years ago, about 25 or more years ago, which left them not entirely in control of their bodily, not their bodily functions, but their bodily extremities, so arms and legs. And this led them to basically strike off the checklist, the whole family planning thing, because they were worried that had they a child, and on rare occasions their arms would fail, the child would fall. And I found this so astounding how someone could actually, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. It's just friggin' amazing on how you can, strike that entirely off your bucket list, and live with that for the rest of your life. So that being said, that's why, because, it of course affects your life significantly if, an impact like that, or an impact like that could, or an accident like that, the impact an accident like that can have on your life, while otherwise your life continues normal. So the parallels towards, health, wealth, happiness are basically struck in multiple angles. So before we get started, housekeeping as always. Number one, views my own, blah, 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 blah. Number two, sharing is caring. So sharing this episode with the whole wild world. It's actually very accurate in these times. The whole wild world, share this episode with the whole wild world. And if it strikes you that one person in particular in your sphere of influence could benefit even more than the whole rest of the whole wild world, then please share it with them through a dedicated instant message, or tell them about the podcast and that they should listen in, because it could actually prove to be helpful to them in the future. So now that we have that off the bucket list, the housekeeping list, actually. One last thing. Yeah, the episodes this week are a bit shorter because major remodeling on the house on a timeline, actually, with a deadline. I am going to deliver as always. But not without making people nervous about that. So that being said, let's get started. Personal risk management. What is it? Right? We could go through the entirety of risk management in a corporate sense, and everything and yada, yada, yada. But what that would kind of defeat the purpose of what I'm trying to deliver here. What this episode is supposed to be about, rather, is how do you identify risks in your personal life? How do you treat them? And how do you avoid them? And how do you deteriorate them? And yada, yada, yada. And that's what this episode is essentially about. So we're going to cut out all the BS and do a grossly simplified version. Yes, I know I'm from the finance sector, which means I have a lot of training in risk management, and I even wrote a paper on it many, many moons ago. And so what I boiled this down to was the essentials. So we're going to go through risk identification, we're going to go through risk assessment, we're going to go through risk response, and we're going to go through implementation and monitoring, or risk prevention measures, implementation and monitoring. There we go. That should be the more apt description. And we're going to do so very briefly because I'm due back on the construction site very shortly. So, risk identification. I think the name gives away a lot. Now, risk identification can be and should be those risks which can happen, all right? And more importantly, though, it's not about identifying the thousands and thousands of risks that come to everybody's head immediately, but it's more about the long-term assessment, long-term brainstorming about risks that you weren't able to think about immediately, right? So it takes a bit of time to sit down. So we technically could have made an exercise episode out of this. And you're probably thinking, boy, this is insanely cryptic, right? What are some risks that could happen in my personal life? Well, there's essential elements there in your life, which this podcast talks about. So it's health. What are the risks to your health? And both in a professional sense, are you working in hard hat areas where you should be wearing a hard hat, and that hard hat is just an eggshell at the end of the day. So if something big falls on your head, that kind of ordeal. Or are you an office hunk that doesn't have that many risks in their professional life, but maybe you're into some bizarre sport that can easily kill you, like base jumping or parachuting, or I don't know, something as simple as mountain biking, which I pursued. And there were more than one occasion. There was more than one occasion where I almost killed myself. If I would have fallen differently, I wouldn't be here broadcasting to you. So, you have to identify very different things. Now, are there risks to your wealth that can have that can set you back significantly in your life? You work, 20 years in a position, you invest in some kind of wonky deal, and your life savings are gone. Setting you back 20 years, that's a significant impact on your life and a risk that you should analyze. Now, don't go and tell me I'm a smart investor. I've seen insanely smart people fall for, bad investment products. It happens. And a lot of times, you don't even have direct influence on it simply because, the markets go to shit, right? And so in that sense, it's insanely important to calculate that as a risk, down the line when you have a setback financially, and how that can impact you. And, happiness, of course, there's a risk to happiness. If you, if you have a shitty spouse, boy, can your life be miserable. So that's a risk, of course, to take into consideration as well. So that's what we're going to go through very briefly. Now, identifying risks, I think we went over. Let's get to the risk assessment part. Now, there are three core pillars when you do a risk assessment. It's the probability of the threat coming to fruition. It's the impact that it will have on your life, because, right, we're doing personal risk management. And then we have the step of prioritization, where we take the two factors of probability and impact into account, measure them up against each other, and then boom, we have a prioritization. Now, from this prioritization, we're going to go to the risk response factors, which we're going to get to in a minute, because I don't want to leave this so cryptic, right? So what's risk probability, right? So you buy a house, you have your mortgage, and the house burns down, right? You would immediately be set back to minus, however many 100,000 or millions you spent on your house, right? So taking out insurance is a pretty clever thing, right? For your house to be insured in case of a fire. Now, what's the probability? In today's times, it's rather low. We've got the electrical fires have kind of diminished significantly, at least in Europe. I don't know how it is in other parts of the world. But building fires are, from electrical wiring, for instance, are a thing of the past, largely due to very efficient fuse breakers and so on and so forth. The probability of that happening is rather low. And so is the price, of course, of an insurance product that you're going to match up against. However, if your house burns down and you're set back to, minus hundreds of thousands of dollars, you don't want to go there, right? So taking out a rather, cheap insurance product to insure you against that is a good thing because the impact would be dire, right? And while the probability is low, the impact is significantly high on your life. And so, yeah, boom, you want to do an insurance product. So I've gone ahead of myself a little bit because now we're going to talk about response, right? So risk response is the next factor where we're going to think about appropriate and effective actions, right? Taking out insurance is, I don't know, I'm not going to talk about it, right? Because anyone who doesn't understand the concept, there is tons of literature, interesting literature on it. And you should have a good insurance person in the first place to speak to and to give you and to sell you good, but not over-the-top coverage. That's where we are, impact probability. So appropriate and effective actions don't necessarily have to be insurance, right? But appropriate and effective actions, if we go back to the beginning and the friend I mentioned, now the appropriate and effective actions that person took were, very, very, very significant. I couldn't imagine putting all on that one card, and there would be other measures of avoiding dropping your kid, right? Don't pick it up, for instance, or, if you do so with both hands, or, have some other measure in place that prevents you from dropping them. That will be something to consider as not another effective action against it, right? So was that appropriate? I don't know. Who am I to say? I don't have kids myself, so I don't know. I would be too irresponsible to be around kids. So let's leave that as it is. And another factor in risk response is, of course, to minimize threats while maximizing opportunities. What does that mean? Let's get back to the insurance, even though I didn't want to. So you minimize the threat, by, of course, let's stick with a house because it's such a grand example. You want to make sure that your electrical wiring is in order. If you're not a pro, have it done by a pro, or at least do it yourself and have it checked out by a pro. That will, take the edge off. Then you can sleep better. Trust me. If you don't know anything about this wild thing, electricity. That being said, maximizing opportunities, I think is pretty much self-explanatory. So I'm not going to go in it too much because I've already cracked the 10 minutes. Damn it. So let's get right to the last step where we go through implementation, response implementation and monitoring. Now, why is this important? You can do all you want. Let's stick with the electrical wiring. And you implement, where the risk diversion implementation thingamajigger would be to have a professional look over all the wiring that you do more or less regularly to see if there are any screw ups. A lot of times you won't get it. We had that in our house really a while ago where, there was the main circuit breaker just wouldn't flip. which could have caused which could have had a disastrous consequence. But since I am rather paranoid about that, I had a friend who is an electrician look over it, and they found it and replaced it. And boom, the risk was mitigated. And that's the implementation measure part of it, and the monitoring. Right, I implemented the circuit breakers, the newest version, and I have it on monitoring. So every time that, well, not every time, but every few years that this friend drops by, I will have them, measure the entire electrical setup of the house and, check out if there are any boo-boos that are in there that we want to get rid of and should. And so the response implementation is insanely important, having assessed and identified, assessed, and created responses to the risk. The response implementation is insanely important. However, the more important part is the consistent monitoring. So is the risk still acute? Has the impact changed? I don't know. Maybe you won the lottery and you're a multimillionaire, and all of a sudden it wouldn't have that much of a dire impact if your house burned down, right? That could be an interesting change in your life, which could have an impact and lead to the monitoring saying, hey, I can kind of save on the house insurance, by going to a cheaper, maybe less reliable insurance company that I need to sue for them to pay. But, hey, I'm in the money. Boom, there you go. Or I don't know, your health thingamajigger, although your health situation changes because, you're out of the family planning phase of your life, and all of a sudden, or kids are out of the house and everything, your entire life situation changes. New risks develop, old risks fall away. So this monitoring part is insanely important. So is as is the regular reassessment of new risks and threats. That's what I just mentioned. Your life situation changes over the course of your life. So reassessing that every now and again is a very, very good idea. So anyhow, the reason for this episode was, rather benign, because that's a risk that isn't going to affect a lot of people. But going down that route with you, because I know that a lot of people, particularly in a young age, are like, nothing's going to happen. And what could possibly happen? If I look back at myself, right, doing all of the crazy shit we did, going from party location to party location at, 250 kilometers an hour on country roads, that was bizarre, because what the hell can possibly go wrong, right? But then, hey, you're in your 20s and, early 20s, or you're even stupider in your late teens, because, what could possibly go wrong here? Hold my beer. And that changes, your risk averse, your ability to assess risks kind of starts to develop at your early 20s, at least from my experience. So, yeah, credit where credit's due. No, that was a wrong sentence. Anyhow, long story short, we're going to leave this here. Share this episode with people who you may know are maybe a bit, on the risk averse side. Don't take risks seriously, maybe, and share this episode with them. If you or anybody else needs additional help, please email theverybestpodcastintheworld@gmail.com. Make sure to share this episode again. And I'm out for today. And tomorrow we're going to talk about, I don't know yet what the exercise is going to be. I'm going to be on the construction site and have a lot of time to think about that. And we shall be in touch tomorrow. See you soon. Stay safe, folks. Bye-bye.